What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and this time we are here with David of Shadow Eden. Thank you so much for being on the show today, man. It's great to have you here.
What's up, Alex? Thanks for having me. Honored.
It's an honor to have you here, man. It's an honor to have you here. SkunkWorx is an absolute kick-ass album. With this instrumental, sort of like experimental sound that's sort of on it, it really kind of takes you through multiple different realities and multiple different dimensions. I feel like my review of it, I mean it as a compliment, is like every song is almost its own unique acid trip. That's how I would describe it in that regard.
You are 100% spot on, my friend.
Oh.
And it goes beyond that. I can explain the inner workings of what the album's about.
No, well, I wanted to ask you because with these experimental sounds, like I had intervals on the show yesterday, and we talked in depth about instrumental music as well as the prog band If These Trees Could Talk. So with the instrumental, experimental style, is there a lot of forethought or a lot of preconceived visions going into the making of an album like this? Or is it very much like, I don't like this term, but like noodling around, if you will?
Well, it's ironic that you should bring that up because I started writing the album in 2016, 2017, and I had the album written, and then the pandemic hit. And I started listening to it during the pandemic, and I'm like, you know what? This is too much noodling. It sounds a lot like my last album, and there's more to life than just how many notes you can play. Not that I have anything against that. You know, a lot of talented players out there that do it right. I decided that I wanted to do a concept album, the concept album that I always wanted to do. So with the exception of Brooklyn 1978, all of the other songs were scrapped. And I wrote the album that you hear today.
Wow. So did this concept kind of guide your hand with regards to how you executed the sound in a way? Or was
Yes.
the concept sort of just like featured with the package, if you will?
It guided everything. It's anti-New World Order, it's anti-Great Reset, and it's anti-artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And let me tell you the thought. I have to explain the thought that brought about the whole thing. Have you ever spoken to someone about anything, and then moments later you check your phone, and it's being advertised on the news feed of one of the social media sites, or even on your laptop, even if you're watching TV and you're streaming, suddenly the automobile or the restaurant or the guitar you were talking about, boom, there's the manufacturer. That's happened to you, right?
Of course.
Okay, it's happened to everyone. So what conclusion have you personally drawn?
To be honest, I never really got too excited about coincidence or, kind of like overanalyze it too much. I try not to think about it too much because then I'll end up digging myself into a rabbit hole that will lead me to distract me from like doing other things. There have been times, because I've done that before. I've overanalyzed a lot of things, either from what you're telling me about or whatnot, where I would literally show up late to Zoom calls on interviews because I would be so distracted from it. So I kind of had to detach myself from that in a way.
Okay, well that's good, and I'm glad that you did because you're fighting it. The assumption I first made was that, well, they must be listening to me, right? They have a capability of listening, possibly even knowing everything that you're doing. And then it occurred to me when I started, thinking about rewriting the album, like, well, what if, does that only work one way? Not only can they listen and influence, but can they actually transmit and influence it? Is it some sort of a cyclical thing where artificial intelligence has been with us longer than we know, and it's influencing everything we do, how we think, how we purchase, and it's reading our biorhythms as we're responding to it. So that's the concept. And that's why the album's called SkunkWorx, because McDonnell Douglas, who manufactures top secret planes and stuff like that, all of our stealth fighters, they had the SkunkWorx program, which is supposed to be a top secret thing. So what I did, I changed the spelling a little bit, and I did SkunkWorx with an X. And if you look at the cover of the album, it is a printed circuit board.
That's cool. That's really cool, actually. It almost looks kind of CGI-esque. And I'm glad that you mentioned this concept because as a diehard fan of Fear Factory, as a diehard Fear Factory fan that addresses similar concepts, I always found that pretty fascinating. With this concept, does it follow like a story arc, if you will, where like maybe it's demonstrating either you or maybe a character going through this experience, where like when you open up with prologue and you end with the final track, Carpathia, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Okay. Is that sort of like a narrative that's being conveyed with it? Is it almost like a story about someone's experience with this?
Yes. The songs are intentionally in the order that they're in. There are subliminal messages throughout the entire album.
Wow. And because this album is instrumental, though, do you feel that maybe it is a little bit more open to interpretation?
Of course, and that's part of the charm of it, and I think that's why it's been very widely accepted now. We have more people showing up to our shows, so I want to thank you for all the spins and everything that you help us get. I think that what the album does, both visually, conceptually, and through the auditory factor, is that it brings people back to their organic nature rather than get wired up into the New World Order's artificial intelligence nature. There is something special about truly being human and not being part machine. And that's the whole concept of the album.
Why do you?
Well, I'll give you one hint. Do you know Carpathia was a ship? Do you know what that ship did?
I can't remember.
Okay, what happened when the Titanic sank, which was supposed to be the indestructible ship, and all those lives were lost? The Carpathia was the first ship to respond to an SOS signal, and they actually rescued a ton of people. Not nearly enough, but there's an example of where man builds this technology. It's supposed to be indestructible, and probably all would have perished had not Carpathia showed up. So we have a man-made construct where they thought the ship was indestructible, couldn't sink, all that jazz. It winds up hitting the iceberg, going down. The Carpathia, which is a much older ship, shows up and saves a ton of people.
That's awesome and a great story. And I think that's fascinating because with the whole man-made thing, like we are what we create. We are what we create. That's a very famous saying. And we as humans are just naturally flawed. We're all human. We all make mistakes. We're all imperfect. So I think everything we are going to create, no matter how much we advertise it being indestructible or how indestructible we try to make it be, there's always going to be some sort of like chink in the armor, as they say.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's the recurrent theme throughout all of the songs. If you look at the artwork on the back of the album, I've got some interesting things. I've got the SR-71 Blackbird. I've got the Michelangelo Sistine Chapel, Pyramid, the Eiffel Tower. Shameless self-promotion because Paul Reed Smith Guitars endorsed me. I've got the PRS prototype and wiring schematic for a Morley pedal.
And shout out to PRS.
Yeah,
the PRS
absolutely.
Custom was my first guitar. My dad had one, so I've noticed. That was the first thing I noticed when we logged onto the Zoom was the guitar in the background with the signature fret markers right there.
Yep.
Is it even a PRS without those fret markers at this point?
Some people insist on it. I've heard other players say, "Well, I like the moon inlays." I didn't even know they had moon inlays until someone said, "Oh, I get mine with moon inlays." Apparently, that's an option. It looks pretty cool. Some people like the dot markers, but yeah, I agree with you. It's not a PRS unless you see the birds on there.
They're like just works of art in general. I know people who can't play a single note on the guitar and are not interested in playing the guitar, but they just look at those things like they're nice paintings almost.
Absolutely. And I've spoken extensively to the man himself and some of the top people there when I go out to the NAMM shows. They haven't been out. Paul Reed Smith itself hasn't been out to a NAMM since 2020. That was the last time I went out to a NAMM convention in California. But they told me some very interesting things about how the guitars are made if you want to hear it.
It's
Pretty fascinating stuff.
no, it's amazing because I've watched numerous documentaries, and at my other job at Alto Music, shout out to our sponsor, we did an interview, content wise, an exclusive interview with Paul Reed Smith, and how he
Nice.
not how the early days of the factories and all that stuff. I mean, story to tell. I hope he writes a book.
He should, but I guess he doesn't want to give all of his secrets away.
Right.
But one of the things I learned about the neck, because when you talk to anyone, aside from the aesthetic quality of the instrument, is how well it plays. And the way it was explained to me, regardless of what model you purchase, they were telling me that when you sand a rough finish guitar neck down, even on a light sanding, it actually causes the wood to warp ever so slightly, and that it doesn't stop until it's light sanded 28 times or so.
That's a random number. I'm sorry, I'm perplexed by just like the random number.
Well, they made that determination. How they did that is beyond me, okay? But I guess after 28 sandings, they get all the moisture out of the wood and whatever, it stabilizes. And I don't know, what they do is that they have, in the factory, they have all the necks in like these crates, and there's day 1, day 2, and they take it through the 28-day process. And at the end of the 28 days, that's when they take it out and they start popping the frets and the inlays in and everything else. And it's absolute insanity. And basically what they say is, I'm not going to mention some of their competitors, but they say, well, that's why when we send out a guitar to a store or to one of our artists, it usually comes out of the bag or the case in tune.
Which is rare. Which is rare.
Which is very, very rare.
Yeah.
And I've had some other really good guitars, and they just, it's not that I don't have other great guitars that play really great, but the Paul Reed Smiths, I don't have any problems with tuning or anything like that with those guitars.
Yeah. And most importantly, I mean, remember, you're hearing a PRS in Santana, you're hearing it in Creed, you're hearing it in Periphery and Between the Buried and Me and Shadow Eden. So it could really work for it's a genreless guitar brand. I feel there are certain guitar brands. There are certain guitar brands, and not a problem at all. Everybody has their niche, but there are some guitars that are just a metal guitar. You're not going to see maybe like a smooth jazz or a country or even a classic rock artist use. But I feel like with PRS, it goes all along the spectrum.
Yep. Very versatile instruments that they make, so absolutely.
Circling back to the concept that's demonstrated on SkunkWorx, why do you feel that this instrumental style of music is sort of like the best way to sort of get your point across?
Because I had been in bands that had vocalists, and I don't want to sound like I'm coming across as ungrateful or gruff, because some of the earliest endorsements I got were in bands with very good vocalists. But what happens is that regardless of how good a vocalist is, there's always someone that will turn around and say, well, yeah, he or she sings well, but I like this singer better. And that there's like this push me, pull you away from some bands. I mean, I've heard people say of, Iron Maiden, Paul Di'Anno or Bruce Dickinson.
Or Blaze Bayley.
Yeah. So there are people will it's a very subjective thing. I personally like Paul Di'Anno better. It's not that I don't. I mean, I love Bruce Dickinson. I love Number of the Beast. I even like Brave New World with Wicker Man on it. I think he still sounds great. But my favorite Maiden vocalist happens to be Paul Di'Anno. I think it just had a rawness to it and an unfinished quality to it that's timeless. It almost sounds a little punkish and grungy in spots, which if you took early Maiden and played it in the 90s, it still sounded current, where some of the stuff they did with Dickinson, if you played it in the 90s, it sounded like it was from the 80s. That's just my opinion. But I think that with instrumental music, regardless of when it's written, if it's done right, it will essentially be timeless.
No, you're 100% right. And it's also liberating in a way. And again, not to like discredit the singers, but like you kind of have to like adjust. Sometimes you have to adjust your tuning to sort of fit the vocalist's range. You're kind of more sort of at the mercy of like a verse, chorus sort of structure. So it almost seems like it is almost liberating, if you will. And again, I'm not encouraging aspiring rock bands to disregard singers. We need singers, but it is kind of liberating in that regard.
And not only that, it's also let me give you this example. If you follow any aspect of the music industry, whether it's metal, pop, hip hop, whatever, okay, there's always drama in the bands. I don't care who it is, okay. And if you watch the Ronnie James Dio documentary that they've had on, have you seen that?
I didn't watch that documentary. No.
Yeah, watch it. It's called Dreamers Never Die.
Okay.
Okay, and it shows you all the different bands he was in and the reasons why he left, including Elf and then Rainbow and then Sabbath and then on his own. Okay, right, wrong, or indifferent to Ronnie James Dio, who's like my favorite metal vocalist. There's always drama in it because the band has to center around the vocalist. Okay, and I don't care what genre it is. Okay, when you go to an instrumental band, do you ever hear that about Steve Vai's band?
No.
No. Joe Satriani?
Nope.
No. You've never. Right. The dregs? No. There's never any issue. You hear about people coming and going because of scheduling and other commitments that they have, but you don't have that kind of drama. So I think that the instrumental genre and the instrumental, the people that gravitate toward being in an instrumental band, I just think overall it's less stress.
I couldn't agree more. And what's funny is, and upon doing interviews, when I'm doing interviews and as I was getting started, I always wanted to interview the lead singer of the band because without a doubt, one way or another, they're going to be the face of the band regardless. So I always wanted to interview the singer because that's the first person they're going to see in the band photo shoots. That when you look at like every band's like who does what, the vocalist is always first and stuff. But I learned very quickly that just because they're the face of the band or they're the singer of the band, they don't write the music. They may not even write the lyrics. I believe Cannibal Corpse Grinder doesn't really contribute to the lyrical process at all. Fantastic frontman and great contributor to the band, but he's not the lyricist, if you will. So it's always funny to see how the singer, who we always give the most credit for, sometimes may do the least. And if you read the Hard Times satire article, they also help the least with loading.
That's true. Another thing, going on the road with the band, someone wakes up one morning, I have a sore throat. Okay, you drink some hot tea, you take something for it, you go out, you do the show. There's hardly any downtime. You really have to come down with something serious to say, I can't do the show. I've been in bands with vocalists, very good vocalists, very talented guys, but they get a sore throat, they get a cold. All of a sudden, you have to cancel out shows. You don't have that problem with an instrumental band. You just go out there and you do.
Yeah.
So that's another advantage. And I think the other cool thing about doing an instrumental band, and I did it more on this album than I didn't do it at all in the previous albums. For this album, once I began the rewrite, I have all of these buddies in the music industry. So I called a lot of them in to play on particular songs. The way I recorded this album is that I went in and I recorded all of the guitar rhythm tracks. Okay, and I put in guide melodies that I wanted to be consistent. And then I would have the drummer come in, the bass player come in. So the guitar rhythm becomes the foundation and the harmonic focal point of what's going on, and they would build their parts around that. That's sort of ass backwards. Normally, you write a song and the drummer goes in and locks in with the click track. I went in and locked in with the click track first, so it's built around that. And I really, my touring band is Alejandro Garcia, who's from Cuba, great percussionist, great drummer. He's been nominated for a Grammy, and I think he's won an Emmy. All right, overall talented guy. My Road Dog bass player is Lance Yeager, who's phenomenal. All right. Lance not only does a great job of coming up with parts that fit what's going on, he's also been in like every cover band, tribute band, and wedding band in existence in New York. So he's got a great ear and he copies parts really easily, which is great for me because if he's copying the part of someone else that's played bass in the band, He's used to doing that. So, and plus he's done, he's been with the band now almost 2 years, and he's done a lot of his own great bass parts. I mean, he's done a few on this album, and then the rest were just people that I knew, like Jordan Kanata, who's the drummer in Slaughter now, played on 2 of the songs. How long have I known Jordan? I've known Jordan since he's 10 years old. So I've known Jordan a long time. I called in Paul Ranieri on bass. Joe Denizone, who's the current violinist in Kansas, played on 2 of the songs. Don Chaffin, who's the producer of this album, he did some synth, some keys, and he did a little bit of there's subliminal messages. There are actually vocal parts, but they're underneath the music, and you have to listen very carefully. Glenn DeGrosser, who was actually the vocalist in a band called Awaken, really talented guy. I brought him in to play bass and guitar synth. He's the only other guitarist on this album that has a solo. Wow. And he does it on SkunkWorx. He does. He used a guitar synth to do this, like it sounds like a flute, like it's a guitar synth though. And the reason why that was done, there were actually 2 versions of SkunkWorx which were done. There was an acoustic version with Joe Denizone on violin, me on guitar, and Jordan Kanata on drums, Paul Ranieri on bass. And then I did a second version because I didn't know if I wanted the orchestral sound or if I wanted more of a Dream Theater-esque sound. So I did a second version with Glenn on bass and guitar synth, Jordan on drums. And I wound up keeping both of them. One became Prologue, and the more proggy metal version became SkunkWorx itself. So that's how I broke that down.
That's a hell of a great team and a hell of a great story to really kind of bridge it all together. And you led me perfectly into the final question I wanted to ask you, because clearly everything sort of fell to place. You had sort of one idea in 2016, and then, life sort of happened, and it served as a great form of artistic inspiration. You have this great concept. It feels like everything leading up to this made the results worth it. Do you see Shadow Eating kind of exploring this concept on future works in a way? Do you kind of want to make this the theme, almost kind of like be the instrumental Fear Factory, if you will? Or do you see yourself exploring other subject matters or other themes in the future?
I'll likely explore other themes in the future. It's what started coming out a little bit on this album, and I think that's because both myself and my drummer are Latin. I'm Puerto Rican, he's Cuban. Some of the playing had a little bit of that influence. If you listen very, very carefully, if you stripped out some of the guitar parts and threw them in a Santana song, they would work very nicely. Nice. So what we may do, and I'm still undecided on this, we may actually make the next album may actually be a little bit more Latin influenced than this, and may actually be heavier than this album.
Hell yeah.
So that's what we're starting to talk about that now, and we're starting to write things, and it's all good. It's all good. We, for an instrumental band, we're drawing great crowds in the tri-state area.
And I can't. And I got to get to a show soon.
Cool. We're going to be at Club 45 in Times Square on April 26th at 8 o'clock. Oh, nice. It's a Friday, April 26th. If you're in the area, you want to come, let me know. You're on the guest list, brother.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Is there just anything else you'd like to promote with upcoming tours, or any shout-outs you'd like to give before we bounce?
Well, the album and the CD are on Shred Guy Records. Okay, you go to Shred Guy Records, they have the album, they have the CD. The album was actually mixed for vinyl, not the CD, but they both sound great. I think the artwork's pretty cool. And I think that it's a very cool listen. I think that for me personally, and I've had people say this to me, so I feel mission accomplished, is that they listen to the album and they're like, you know what? I was having a real crappy day, and I listened to this album, and it sort of it sort of unwires you. It's sort of like a matrix where
ironic.
They pull the plugs out, and for 45 minutes you're not hooked up to the AI machine. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I love it, and and you know what? The only machine I have is my headphones or whatever I'm blasting the music to. So that's a awesome slogan to keep it. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Shadow Eden. Be sure to check out SkunkWorx. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Be good. Thank you, brother.